Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pete Coltis, and I am a partner at Alvarez & Marsal here in Miami by day. And at nights, weekends, and every other minute in between, I am the chair of the President's Council at our FIU. So it's great to be here with all of you on the very first week of this special fall semester. I think it's all, I think no one anticipated this 6 months ago or even 3 months ago, but we are where we are. And so we're going to learn some really interesting things today, and we'll go into those in a minute. We want to go ahead and cover. I'm also joined by my co-host, Sandy Gonzalez-Levy, and Sandy's going to conduct the Q&A session at the end. And we want you to go ahead and we want to make this very much interactive. We've got about a half an hour of presentations, and then hopefully we'll have between 20 and 30 minutes for Q&A, and that usually ends up being very, very productive and very informative. So let me go ahead and I'm just trying to get my screen. Oh, there we go. Zoom call etiquette. So a couple things we'd like for you to do. Please put yourself on mute. To promote networking, please turn on your video, right? And certainly use the chat feature to privately message with others within the chat or with all of us. So to let us know what you're thinking. So send your questions. There's a question button on the bottom, and there's also a chat button. So you can use either one to submit questions. You can raise your hand, or you can just put the chat in there and we'll collect those, and those will get shot to Sandy so that we can ask our two panelists after they go through their presentations. Okay. All right. Well, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So today's conversation features Dr. Elizabeth Bejar, Senior Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs, and Dr. Bridgette Cram, Associate Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs. Dr. Bejar is going to touch base with us on, or talk to us about the state of learning and work. And then Dr. Cram is going to talk to us about the relatively new Micro-Credential initiative going on at FIU. So should be a very interesting discussion. I'm going to get out of everyone's way and turn it over to you, Dr. Bejar.
Thank you, Pete. Truly appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here with you on this Thursday afternoon, everyone. Want to have a conversation, and I'm gonna open and close, hopefully, if this presentation goes smoothly, with the same kind of disclaimer. And it's more of a disclaimer to really engender some conversation. The presentation that you're going to see is a presentation that we put together for the President's Council, but it's a culmination of years of work. And it's a culmination, and particularly our Micro-Credential initiative is a culmination of a few years of really thought-provoking time internally with the university's administration, and also about what's been happening in higher education. I think as we conclude the presentation, we'll have the COVID conversation, right? They do interconnect, but I want to have the conversation around higher ed. And if you can kind of take yourself to 6 months prior, right, pre-pandemic, if you will, there had been for years an ongoing conversation about the relevance of higher education. Do I need a degree? There's a multi-millionaire tycoon venture capitalist, right, who's on the news saying, I didn't need the degree. We certainly have outliers. We've all studied them through our own professional development, who chose to drop out of college, and certainly by luck, skill, grit, and determination, they've been very successful. But really the conversation around higher education and industry and technology is moving much faster than higher education. So I just want to point out, right, that part of our conversation around higher education and why I commit myself to higher education is because I think it's entirely relevant. And I think it's, certainly important for people to reach for their highest abilities. And the solution for higher education involves a systemic transformation that prioritizes more practical and applied curriculum, and really works with disruptive technologies. And so the days of the ivory tower have really little to do with FIU from the perspective of ensuring that we remain not only relevant, but at the forefront of business, innovation, industry, and technology. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that we looked at and that many folks around the world looked at is the structure of work, right? So more and more, many of you may be involved in day contracting in the gig economy. And we're certainly have seen a shift in the past 5 years of traditionally structured jobs. People, and particularly recent graduates, are saying, you know, the days of working at Bell South, if you will, and you know, retiring after 30 years with a gold Rolex and working at one company, which was seen as a sign of stability and as a sign of success, had really transitioned. And so really what many industry folks were looking at as they're looking to employ successful folks is their ability to be flexible, their ability to be nimble. And so a person who had jumped around on a resume across a number of years, a number of jobs, today might be seen as somebody who actually could do those multiple tasks and provide multiple assets to an organization. Whereas 20 years ago, that might have been seen as a little flighty, right? The other thing that we look at from the future is automation, and certainly technology and the technological changes certainly would impact what's happening and what the future is going to be. And so we see that, and when we see that, we see employment patterns changing. And so these are a couple of the things that we do know. Next slide, please. So in the last 25 years, right, a third of the jobs that we have today did not exist. Or barely existed, particularly around IT, particularly around hardware manufacturing, systems management, app creation, big data. Now we're having conversations around quantum. And it is not that it is only impacting the IT industry, it's that the IT industry is impacting the way we live, the way we eat, the way we sleep, the way we work. And so that's critical. And what you see in that bullet point might be different than what I see. So what I see in my capacity as an administrator and an education leader at the university is that I have to prepare our graduates for jobs that don't exist today. Right. And in many cases, that argument can be made for higher education as it transitioned from the Industrial Revolution, right, from the Agrarian Revolution to the Industrial Revolution and so on. But now the pace of technological change is much faster. And so we recognize that we have to keep up with that. And we recognize that even a student, whether an undergraduate student or a graduate student, 2 to 5 years after graduation may be needing to continuously learn. So we're always learning, and that's because we're trying to keep up. And so that's certainly important. And one of the other things that we're talking about is independent work. The gig economy keeps rearing its presence across people, and it may be a personal preference, it may be a professional preference. For folks, it may be that people want to spread their abilities across a number of industries, and so they choose contract laborers, where contract laborers were not seen as something as a profession. We're seeing more and more of that. Next slide, please. So what do we think that's going to happen? So, you know, we're trying to break out a crystal ball, and what we really anticipate is that there's going to be a convergence, and a convergence between career and technical and baccalaureate skills and just-in-time learning and just-in-time to market. And so one of the things that we do talk about, and particularly at higher ed and at FIU, that's a research university, it's a Research One university, we believe that we continue to espouse the future of research universities that are solution centers. But solution centers have to be embedded in innovation, in transformation, and in serving their economy and supporting the economic engine of their economy. So we have to have that merger of what's traditionally workforce, right? So when I speak with my faculty, you know, we talk about work is not a 4-letter word. And traditionally in higher education, right, work was not something that we talked about. We talked about being learned. We talked about our disciplines. And it is okay to say that the relevance of higher education is to be able to get a job and to be able to build that job, to be able to build that work into a career, into a lifetime of success that can be flexible and that can be nimble. And the other is certainly that change, the accelerated rate of change requires learners to be less focused on subject knowledge and more solution-centric. Sometimes this is misinterpreted. This does not mean that subject knowledge is not important. You have to be, you have to own your discipline. You have to own your field. You have to be an expert in what you do and what you know. But the application of that has to be more solution-centric. So to be able to be innovative, to be able to apply to new modalities, and to that 30% of industry that hasn't been identified yet, that hasn't come around. Remember, from a higher education perspective, we're educating students and graduating students potentially in majors that don't tie one-to-one to careers and to industry. So it's not necessarily about whether I'm a psychology major or whether I'm an IT major. It's what am I doing with that major to contribute to industry, to contribute to the discipline. And so, that's how we're structuring internally the university to move to the future. Let me go to the next slide and I'll show you where we have been. So traditionally, we've got two different models here. This is where we have been. And in some places, institutions are still here, which is you pick a major, and that major is your focal point in your discipline. FIU over the last few years through the Worlds Ahead strategic plan developed a major and identified as well hard skills and competencies that students needed to understand. And of course, embedded through that critical thinking, civic knowledge, teamwork, and of course, oral and communication skills. The ability to communicate effectively can't be understated. And so with that, where we were as known as a T-shaped model or an H-shaped model, we were at the H-shaped model, and really the Next Horizon strategic plan and the initiative that my colleague is gonna discuss really emanates from the conversation of where do we go from here. We believe that we're forward thinking at FIU. We identified certain competencies and are piloting those through a draft quality enhancement plan. But really, what is the future and where is the shift? Next slide, please. And so we actually went out to the literature, right? And there was a commission on workers and technology. And so there were questions, right? The questions about automation, questions about artificial intelligence, and a fundamental rethinking of our relationship to work. And a fundamental, again, that impact of the technological advances and why this one might just be different from prior technological advances because of the rate and the pace of change and the impact. Next slide, please. And so when we really focus, we can hone in on digitization as a major driver of change, right? And it's all over. You can look around your homes. We're Zooming as a result of digitization and meeting virtually, but the digitization of assets, infrastructure, data, platforms, operations, supply chain. For those of us who grew up in South Florida, supply chain for many of us, 40 years ago meant you would go to Doral or north of the airport and they were shipping something to Latin America. That is not, we now have a better understanding of supply chain interactions. And those of us who were shopping just a few months ago for anything on the internet, including toilet paper and hand sanitizer and cans of Lysol, understand what interactions of supply chain and business models might mean, and certainly disruptions to that. And of course, the digitization of the workforce. So here we all are working, right? Increased remote workers. We had already anticipated that 20% of FIU's workforce would be remote by 2025. Certainly the COVID is a catalyst for potential, change towards those numbers. But really technology mobile connectivity and its impact and its stress and stressors towards the traditional brick and mortar have brought many questions into the change. And one of the sound bites behind that, next slide please, is it really comes, you know, from the skills gap. And again, I say this is now a six-year-old comment, but really we continue to hear the same thing, that graduates lack critical thinking skills and the ability to communicate effectively and solve problems creatively. But employees find that also they lack the technical and the hard skills. So all of that combined actually took our T shape, evolved it a little bit to our H shape, and all of this information informed our next model, which is our University 3.0. Next slide, please. So the model that we're working on today and that we're working from is really the next evolution of Research One University, which is what are your base competencies, right? How is the learning tailored to your needs, to your position? You know, what kind of curriculum do you really need to achieve the goals that you want or to achieve the goals that you should have? If the competency is through a certification or through a degree or through a master's degree or through, you know, a PhD, that is, you know, appropriate and a decision that needs to be made, and certainly the work, right? So what are the required competencies for the work that you want? So people may say, I want to go to law school, right? So that ability to read and to write effectively and to conduct analysis is critically important, right? And it's okay to have the conversation around competencies and disciplines. And so what are those and how do they align with the profile that each learner brings to the table? And go ahead, please. Thank you. So one of the things that we talked about as we were working on the Next Horizon strategic plan is there's more than one response, there's more than one answer. There's over 4,000 institutions of higher learning in the United States. And certainly most institutions are trying to address this at some level. What we understand at FIU, and I'm honored to be part of a very strong team that's open to innovation, is that the diversity of industry and higher ed together is actually, you know, a plus for us, and that there are multiple approaches. But one of the things that we knew we needed to do was simultaneously work on the degree path for our students who were registered today with us, and work simultaneously on our responsibility to our alums and to our community, which is the, you know, the continuing education aspect. So we're identifying competencies for our degree seeking students today. If they're freshmen, sophomores, if they're graduate students, we have plans in place for and opportunities for them to gain critical competencies while they are getting their degree. And we also have plans for our alumni and community and for industry to access that content that might be relevant to them. So I certainly feel responsible for a student who's graduated from an MBA in data analytics 2 years ago, and want to be able to be seen as a resource to them to be able to come back. We recognize that there are certifications that can be aligned to degree programs. We know that there's self-paced learning. There's just-in-time skill sets. There's industry partners and working with industries in new ways. And certainly there's micro-credentials. Next slide, please. And so one of the critical ways, right, that we're looking at getting there, again, multi-pronged approach, we have to be, is deeper partnerships with industries, which goes beyond, and particularly for the audience of the President's Council, right? So the days of just having industry members on boards and just saying, you know, we're gonna meet every 6 months and talk about all the great things we do, may not be enough for higher education. Higher education may need more practical applications, more abilities for our students to experience real life while they're in school. And we need to leverage innovative learning platforms for all learners, irrespective of time and place. COVID is helping with that, certainly. And we need to provide coaching. Coaching in higher education is something that FIU has fully embraced. CEOs, Wall Street executives around the globe have always gone to executive coaching. As an appropriate tool. And we're now saying, no, that's an appropriate tool for a freshman too. That's an appropriate tool for a first time in college student, to have a coach to guide them along the way and to give them the tool set that they may need. And we want to build lifelong learning pathways for our graduates. We want FIU to be a hub for Panthers for their entire career, or multiple careers as they would have it. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is through our micro-credentialing initiative. And so with that, I would like to introduce my right hand and Assistant Vice President for Academic and Student Affairs, Dr. Bridgette Cram.
Thank you, Dr. Bejar. And thank you to the President's Council for having us today to talk about this new initiative. Today, I want to just talk a little bit about what micro-credentials are, the value that they can bring to learners, the community, and to employers, and where we are today and where we hope to go. So what is a micro-credential? A micro-credential is the digital representation of a competency that a learner can demonstrate. So micro-credentials are digital badges. They can be micro-certificates. They can be things like micro-masters or micro-bachelor's degrees that we're seeing now. And they can also really be anything that you can use to stack into a larger pathway that leads to some higher goal. So they could also include things like industry certifications, degrees, certificates, things like that. And how can micro-credentials be earned? At FIU, micro-credentials can be aligned to a student's coursework. They can be aligned to co-curricular experiences that they would engage with either through their college or through student affairs, or they can also be aligned to various continuing education programs. Next slide, please. So what is the value? When we were thinking about the micro-credentialing program, the value to us really comes from the fact that these micro-credentials can help learners create a narrative for the competencies that they have gained. So we know that learners are gaining valuable skills and competencies already through their degree programs and through the co-curricular activities that they participate in. So the micro-credential, again, is just that digital signal that a student has or learner has gained a specific competency through achieving specific milestones related to those experiences. When we look at the value for employers and industry partners, it really goes to the fact that in terms of the FIU micro-credential, that there is a link between the activity that the student is completing or the learner is completing and that achievement of the badge. So basically, for an FIU micro-credential, it is not participation-based. Students have to complete assessments, they are assessed, and then they can earn the digital badge. So when we look at how learners can utilize micro-credentials, they can share them in a variety of ways. One of our most popular micro-credentials now is the Remote Teach Ready badge, which has been awarded to our faculty and staff that have gone through training to make sure they're prepared to offer their courses in a remote format. And a lot of our faculty and staff receiving that have been able to share that on LinkedIn. So you can share your digital badge to social media, you can embed them on your website, you can put them in your email signature, and of course you can put that link on your resume or CV so an employer can always see what it is that our learner had to do to receive that digital badge. And again, going back to the narrative conversation, it's a really helpful reference when learners are preparing for internships, post-graduation opportunities, or other career changes. They're able to build a narrative, again, to help them articulate those competencies. So when we talk about the understanding of digital badges within, the industry or a specific employer, we are going to have to work to build that understanding, right? So we acknowledge that part of making this micro-credential valuable is working with our industry partners to explain what it means. So that is something that we will be working on. But for the student or the learner themselves, when they have the badge, they're able to go into an interview better prepared to really talk about those skills, which we know is very, very important and sometimes not so obvious, especially for our recent graduates. Next slide, please. So who is or what is the Office of Micro-Credentials? So our guiding kind of mission vision is that we want to foster an ecosystem where FIU students, alumni, employers, and learners in the community can enhance their skills through versatile programs, courses, and workshops that meet the needs of the 21st century world of work. We were founded in 2019, as Dr. Bejar said, to support the development of this university-wide micro-credentialing initiative. And our why is really to focus on the learners, not just students. And how can we help all learners validate their particular skill set? Next slide, please. So what is the framework? This was reviewed after a lot of research on best practices, what's happening across the nation, and also driven by our vision that micro-credentials should be linked to assessment and student learning. So basically, when you look at a micro-credential, it needs to be competency-based, right? It needs to be tied to something that the student is able to do. We want there to be rigor, and in order for there to be rigor, we have student learning outcomes that are identified and also assessment methods so that we know the learner has been able to demonstrate that particular outcome. We also want to have the conversation about how it's aligned to demand. And that's really looking at, again, how are we meeting those gaps that our employer partners may identify. The next is that we want them to be comprehensive. So what this really means is that we're encouraging learners to reflect on this, opportunity that they just went through, and to think about how that opportunity or experience is linked to their own academic, personal, or professional goals, so they can continue to curate that lifelong learning journey after they're finished with this particular experience. And finally, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, they're designed to be stackable and portable. So stackable meaning that to the extent possible, we're building series of micro-credentials that, again, align to these various experiences so that learners can access these in multiple ways, but that they're all tied to maybe a particular meta competency or larger learning outcome. And portable, that goes to the fact that learners can share these micro-credentials and that they don't just live within the FIU system. Next slide, please. So where are we right now in terms of the data? We have 24 active badges. We have over 16 in development. We have awarded over 2,200 digital badges to faculty, staff, students, and people in our community participating through continuing education. We have over a 72% claim rate. So in terms of the value that the badge provides to the earner, people are claiming these badges, and those badges have been shared or viewed over 4,800 times. So we're really excited about that because usually for programs starting out, the numbers are not that high. So it's exciting to see that people are really excited about earning these badges and sharing them, externally. And in terms of some feedback, this is feedback actually from a student digital badge that we had over the summer in response to COVID. We offered badges in initiative and resilience to some of our student employees that were no longer able to work due to COVID. So you can see that the students were actually surprised that they got so much out of it, that they were willing to engage in something that was a little bit more rigorous than maybe your usual co-curricular activity, but that through the reflection and the assignments, they were actually able to get a lot out of it that they could take with them, beyond FIU, which is really important to us. Next slide, please. So what's next? Again, we are going to continue to work with units to develop badges for learners at all levels. And what's really important to know is that we are a liaison office. So our office is here to support units who are really, really interested in aligning digital badges to any of their programming. So you can visit us at our website, microcred.fiu.edu, where there's all of the information you might need to learn more about it. And then, contact us at microcred@fiu.edu when you're ready to think about, a badge you might want to create. We're looking forward to engaging with community and industry partners to begin to align our program and identify those skills gaps. And then we also will continue to develop strategies to create these curated learning pathways for all learners, which, as Dr. Bejar mentioned, not only includes micro-credentials, but also includes looking at how industry certifications align to degrees, plus micro-credentials, might look for our own students. And we are not reinventing the wheel. So if a industry certification exists, our goal is to help make that accessible to our learners. It is not to create digital badges to replace things that are already recognized by industry. So that concludes my slides. I'll now turn it back over to Dr. Bejar for closing remarks.
Thank you, Bridgette. And just a brief closer on this part, right, which is COVID. So as you can see, we've been working on this. This is an evolution. We have established prior learning assessment policy, competency-based education. The micro-credentials for us are not standalone, particularly for students. So if a student potentially wanted to take a micro-credential in esports management, and it's a just-in-time, auto-paced, but after they put 2 or 3 credentials together, if they wanted to come back and say, now I'm ready to get a degree or get a second degree, we would have a way to be able to document that competency and scaffold that back into a degree for credit. So even our vision is, even though a student may take a micro-credential non-credit today, that doesn't mean it can't be applied if there's proof of learning later on down the road towards a credit-bearing opportunity. So I leave that open, and there's a big question mark, right, which is COVID and the pandemic. And so we were always planning on this, and now, in so much as there's a question mark, there probably should be an exclamation point to it next. FIU has always stood with the South Florida community, and we will continue to stand with the South Florida community. So how can this initiative of upskilling, of reskilling, of just-in-time learning help industries who may actually be burgeoning as a result of our during pandemic or post-pandemic economy in South Florida? Or how can we help people who, some people may be going through some difficult times right now and having a personal moment and saying, okay, this is my time. This is my time to go back. This is my time to learn a skill. This is my time to reframe. And how can we help with that? And so we're stand ready. We're stand ready to accelerate our progress in this micro-credential initiative to be able to support not only our students and our alums, but also the economy of South Florida, as we will be strong in our recovery. And I know so many people on this call will be part of that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Pete.
All right, thanks, Dr. Bejar and Dr. Cram. So Sandy, now comes the fun part. I'm going to turn it over to you I know we've been collecting some questions, some very good ones actually.
Yes.
So I'll let you go ahead and jump in. Sandy?
Absolutely. So thank you, and thank you all for participating this afternoon. And thank you, Dr. Bejar and Dr. Cram, for providing some very good insights into the evolution and development of this initiative. And as we mentioned before, you can put your questions in the chat, and we do have a number of questions. I'm going to begin by asking a question to Dr. Bejar. Dr. Bejar, you mentioned that we are preparing our students and our graduates for jobs that do not exist right now. How are you accomplishing that? And is that with consultations with business, industry, other universities? Can you elaborate a little bit on that partnership?
Absolutely. So beyond the partnerships, it's really an exploration and an ability to assimilate into the curriculum multiple aspects of diversity of thought, of diversity of application, of the knowledge and skill set that students have. So we want to make sure that a student who is studying a particular discipline is exposed to the various innovations that are happening today And we prepare them for a broader skill set, which includes communication, it includes advocacy, it includes emotional intelligence, it includes critical thinking, it includes reasoning, right? So it includes a broad range of skills that focus on the broader competencies that human beings need to have in order to be successful in a flexible and dynamic environment, which is what we know is happening in the workforce today.
Okay, the next question I think would go to Dr. Cram. Are industry certifications also consider micro-credentials?
So to the extent that they're able to be stacked together into larger learning pathways, yes, right? So technically, yes. I think depending on who you speak to, that answer may vary. But I think that at FIU, the way we envision those is that that would be something that we could stack together with our offerings within the micro-credential program.
And a follow-up question to that, are micro-credential courses eligible for financial aid?
So the micro-credential is just something that's aligned to an existing experience. So if a student is enrolled for courses that were traditionally eligible for financial aid, and there happens to be a micro-credential associated with it, that remains the same. For continuing education courses, of course, they're not eligible for federal financial aid.
Okay, and this question could be for either or both of you. Can these courses be built into current curriculum to highlight specific skills, or are they meant to enhance and add to a curriculum already?
So I'll take a first stab, and then Bridgette can fix what I mess up. In fact, it's a little bit of both. So really what we want, we have the ability and the flexibility to be fast with the micro-credential. Even though we're working with faculty expertise, and even though we're communicating with our faculty senate, the regulatory environment is such that we can move a micro-credential to market, if you will, and get it in front of the student very quickly from a non-degree perspective, for a continuing ed student, for a degree seeking student, from a co-curricular perspective. What we want is, and the approach we're taking is partnering with faculty along the way, so that those faculty are actually infusing that into the curriculum. It does take us a while to move curriculum. And we believe that we've got a great cadre of faculty in our university who are actually looking forward to making sure that their faculty, not that we're adding on right to the faculty, but that we're to the curriculum, but that we're continuously amending the curriculum so that it reflects a 21st century learning environment.
Thank you. Thank you for that. The next question has to do with, let's see, for those who may or may not have finished a degree, but have significant professional experiences, is there any conversation on crediting or credentialing for those experiences that could help the individual meet their goals? Who would like to answer that?
So I'm happy to take a stab. Bridgette worked very hard on the competency-based education. We have been working for a few years. We have a prior learning assessment policy at the university that allows the departments to explore a given student who comes in with a transcript of other experiences, either to be able to, if at the department's choosing, look to see if there's a departmental exam that can be created, or if there's other experience that can be given after documented learning has occurred. So we're certainly engaging with partner faculty to explore the feasibility of that in being flexible towards our degree. Bridgette, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think you covered it. I think that the way that micro-credentials may align, or some of these other types of certifications operate in the same way, right? So if we're able to package learning in a way that we know is led by faculty, is assessed, and is rigorous, that makes translating that learning into credit a little bit easier. So that is something that what Dr. Bejar mentioned, we are working on.
Thank you. Thank you for that. President Rosenberg constantly is talking about lifelong learners. How are we reaching out to that group in order to bring them back to the university? Can you expand on that?
So we're just at the beginning, as you know, Dr. Cram noted in her presentation. The Office of Micro-Credentialing was launched officially in 2019, consistent with our Next Horizon plan of 2020 through 2025. But part of that conversation is just beginning. Working with key industry partners that we've always had, strong relationships on this President's Council, strong relationships on our alumni board, to really start engaging our learners. Many folks, as the numbers indicate, we're very proud of the work that we've done in a very short time, and given the situation. But we certainly know that there are opportunities that are out there. So we talk about ourselves as being learner-centric, moving from student-centric to learner-centric, because I may need to learn something. I've actually had to, you know, spend my nights and weekends learning some things so that I can keep up with my own higher ed industry. And so we're all, as professionals, lifelong learners, but how do we apply that to our alumni community is one of the next phases of our implementation, and really having enough of a broad base of courses and opportunities and micro-creds to be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. This question is for Dr. Cram, and it has to do with process. So it says, as you are aware, we had started working on launching some MC badges at the College of Business pre-COVID. Is this something we must run through the new MC office, or can the colleges, schools issue these independently?
So I messaged that person back to let her know, but it turns out we were already working with them, right? So
okay.
The policy that we passed states that this is a centralized process, really to just make sure that any micro-credentials designed meet the standards that I had kind of referenced earlier, right? So we manage the platform, we have access to the ability to issue the badges, because if everyone was going to do this by themselves, they'd all have to purchase that separately. So the process we have is centralized, but we work with the units to make sure that, you know, we can get them what they're looking for, right? So it's a very collaborative process. And I think at this point, we've worked with almost every college on the campus, or have consultations, you know, set up in the next few weeks.
Great.
If I may add to that, and centralization is one of those hard conversations to have at any organization, but particularly in higher ed. You know, one of the things that we were worried about is that if we had 10 different versions of FIU leadership badges, FIU leadership doesn't really mean anything. So we want to coalesce, right? And we want to make sure that the sum is greater than the parts. And so it is actually, and there's another question in the chat about continuing ed, and many of our colleges, we have, you know, over 180 departments, and we have 13 deans, and we have our co-curricular units that are actually leading the pack in some of these innovative badges and micro-credentialings from the co-curricular and the experiential learning department in academic and student affairs. And what we want to do is bring everybody to the table. And for some who are out there and have taken further steps, the reality is it may feel like we're pulling you back in a little bit. And for others who are further close to the chest, we may be pushing you out of the nest a little bit. And we need to titrate as a university to make sure that we speak with one voice. We are all in this together from a mission and vision perspective, but our continuing education mindset as a university has the diversity of that continuing education mindset is beautiful, but also simultaneously maddening, in that we oftentimes compete with each other. And what we hear, because I've been on a listening tour for about 18 months, is that from the alumni side, from the industry and business side, from the South Florida community side, they don't know what the access point is to the university. There's so many people at the university and there's so many units that they don't know actually how to get into the inside, and talk to who is the right person, who is the right department, what is the right department. So we're gonna try and work together to build a coalition, so that we're one face. And I think that actually will serve us well in addressing Sandy's prior question around helping the community and being a service to South Florida.
Actually, to that point, there is a question that I think you basically just answered, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Will there be an opportunity to create micro-credential communities? For example, perhaps identify staff members, faculty, and partners that participate in different tracks and topics on an ongoing basis. This has to do, obviously, with internal support structures. So in a way you answer that, but do you want to expand on that question?
So I'm going to say yes. And Bridget wakes up every day and says, I need partners to work with, and partners who are willing to partner with other folks across the proverbial aisle, if you will. So we're certainly open to that.
Thank you. How does this relate to the activities of FIU's Continuing Education Department and UPCEA? And I think that you also kind of mentioned that, but can you elaborate also on that?
So I'm gonna let Bridget talk about UPCEA, which is the Continuing Education Accreditation organization. But yes, we certainly are trying to centralize a common vision around continuing ed, so that we can have an internal face and to our students and support them well, and an external vision for our community.
Well, and part of what we're trying to do, in addition to the academic units, I work really closely with a lot of the continuing ed units across the university. And the great thing about micro-credentialing is that if we see something really great happening in continuing ed, how do we translate that into a co-curricular experience? How can we get some just-in-time learning for our students? And vice versa. If we create a really great curriculum for our students, how do we then move that for external learners, right? So building that very fluid pathway is something that we are actively working on, because that is something that is not very common in higher education, but has a lot of value in addressing a lot of the concerns that Dr. Bejar mentioned in her presentation.
Okay, this question is for Dr. Bejar. You mentioned that remote learning because of coronavirus has been escalated exponentially. Can you talk a little bit about what percentage of our students are learning remotely now, and what are the benefits and liabilities if we have been able to ascertain those?
So one of the things I mentioned that was envisioned in our strategic plan is remote work. And that was the first step, right? We know that online learning, but I'm gonna try to answer the question that was asked. Online learning is a form of remote learning. And we had and have a very strong, robust FIU learning team. And it is 100% asynchronous. And folks, faculty and staff are supported by an instructional design team and with strong professional development. When we made the switch to remote learning, as most schools did around the country sometime in March, it was a proverbial flip of the switch. And so everyone was remote, whether they had the professional development, whether they had the technological tools, right? The faculty members still own their discipline. Faculty members still an expert in their discipline, but they may not have been able to communicate that effectively through, you know, this Zoom environment, or translate their assignments and assessments, and the ability for students to work together. And in many cases, a lot of the learning required a clinical or experiential component, and that wasn't foreseen. So I think we're still learning. I don't have a complete answer to the question. We're still learning about remote. We have, I think there's 30% of our classes this semester are remote for the fall. If I'll have to check on the percentage exactly, but that is in an abundance of caution and safety for the university community. But what is different from March to fall is that remote is synchronous. So there is a planned time and place where the learning is occurring. And so that is significantly different from FIU Online, which is really about not necessarily the independent learner, because certainly group projects are assigned in FIU Online, but the independence of learning, which, you know, at some point, if I wanted to take on another degree, I might do it through an online platform because my time during the day is occupied. And so that freedom of time is not represented in today's remote learning for fall 2020. We're still learning there. I think one of the benefits of the synchronous is the ability, at least for this short period of time, hopefully short period of time that we will be remote, is for there to be some semblance of engagement and affinity to one another within the classroom. So one of the things that we do know about the spring semester is that the remote learning happened after 10 weeks of being together. And so that might have been psychologically and sociologically a better way to go to remote than to actually start remote, right? We onboarded 4,000 freshmen between summer and fall 2020, just Monday, just a few days ago, entirely remote. So not only did they graduate high school remote, but they started FIU in a remote environment. And that worries me. That worries me about their affinity, that worries me about their ability to see themselves as a college student, because this version of college is a little bit different, and hopefully it's a little short term. But we're assessing and we're continually refining. I don't know, Sandy, if I've been able to answer the question, but we're working at it every day.
I think you have, and obviously we are going through unprecedented times, and we definitely are doing the best that we can. This next question is for Dr. Cram, and it has to do, hold on one second because I lost it.
Why don't we make this the last one, Sandy, because I know we're close to running out of time here.
So is there sufficient research already to support the validity of micro-credentials, and does your own personal experience show that most employers understand micro-credentials?
So there is research out there that is that shows that employers do recognize these credentials as valuable during the hiring process. And I believe that came from an HR survey that Northeastern University does, if I'm remembering correctly. The exciting thing is that we are helping to contribute to that research, right? So the movement towards micro-credentials as a viable mode of learning in higher ed is being strengthened over the past few months due to COVID and this focus on remote education, right? So as we progress, we are collecting data, we're publishing that data, so we're helping contribute to that literature. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are some employers that are very comfortable with this. There are other employers that, after some coaching with them, they understand what that means. When they look at a badge, how do I know that it's legitimate? What am I looking for? And we're very confident in our model. So when we explain what an FIU badge is, that also helps them look at other micro-credentials that people may be bringing into, you know, their own workspaces. So it's something that we continue to work on, and we're really excited to have those conversations with employers so that the value of an FIU micro-credential continues to increase.
Okay, with that, Dr. Bejar, would you like to say some final words or statements? The same with Dr. Cram.
I just want to thank you all for your time. Clearly, you can tell we're passionate about this. We're dedicated to this opportunity. We think it's certainly important, and now even more so. I want to thank Sandy, your leadership. I want to thank Pete, your leadership, and the President's Council for always being a sounding board for the university and continuing to help the university with impact. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you for that. Dr. Cram?
No, I echo those closing statements. Again, we're excited to meet with anyone that is interested. So please feel free to reach out to us. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
We're going to go ahead and put the link on the
Yep.
on the chat in case anybody wants to take it from there.
Yep.
So again, thank you both, and I'll turn it over to Pete.
Yeah, sure. The only other things I want to remind everyone of is there's a survey that we're asking you to fill out, so that which is go.fiu.edu PC survey, where you can give us your thoughts on future topics. We don't have a specific one scheduled yet for September, although we're looking at a couple different topics. So would love to get your feedback. If you're interested in knowing more about the President's Council, certainly reach out to myself or Sandy or Danya or Linda, really anybody. So, but I want to again thank Dr. Cram and Dr. Bejar. Your passion and attention to detail on this is definitely second to none. So it's a really great program and one that we should be very proud of. So thanks, everyone.